Hej och välkomna till Techrekpodden. Det här är ju en podd som handlar om allting som med techrekrytering att göra. Inte minst hur man attraherar chefer och ledare och techpersonal av alla beslag. Det handlar ju också då om digitaliseringen och inte minst AI har ju handlat mycket om senaste månaden. Och idag har vi faktiskt ett till avsnitt, inte helt oväntat, med Siadhal Magos som är grundaren av Metaview. Som är ett sånt där verktyg som vi upplever har fått stor effekt på hur bra vi jobbar helt enkelt. Siadhal som äger det här bolaget och driver det har också en väldig förståelse för vad som händer och vad man kan göra med AI idag. Så att ett jätteintressant avsnitt för er som vill dels fatta praktiskt hur kan man få till grejer och också såklart vad är hur kommer rekrytering att påverkas av AI-verktyg. Och för det som inte redan förstått det så kommer det påverkas mycket och det gäller att hänga med. Så det här är ett bra avsnitt för att förstå det. So, tell me who you are.
Hey, Carl. Pumped to be on the pod, first of all, so thanks so much for having me. I'm Siadhal. I'm co-founder at a company called Metaview. We are all about helping empower recruiters with the latest AI and using these sort of revolutionary, foundational new powers that are at our disposal to help recruiters spend less time on their administrative and low leverage tasks and more time on relationships with candidates and hiring managers. What that really means in our products, and maybe we'll talk a bit about it, is
we're definitely going to talk a lot about it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, so that's me. I'm the co-founder of that company. Aside from that, I've got a young family, so two daughters, almost 3-year-old and almost 1-year-old. Live here in the UK. Spend a bunch of time with customers either in Europe and in the US as well. But those keeps me pretty busy. Young family and co-founder of a startup. So that's really all there is to me at this point.
Can you just give a little bit of background? The sort of starting story of Metaview, also perhaps how did you end up here?
Yeah, actually came at the sort of the idea or the problem not from a recruiter's perspective at all. Funnily enough, I was previous to starting the company. I was at Uber 2016, 2017. Growing incredibly fastest growing company ever. There's plenty of Kool-Aid going around about how special this company was. It is a special company in many ways. And it was really the first role I had where a lot of my time was spent on hiring. So I ended up just getting very, in some cases frustrated, in other ways fascinated with the fact that this is clearly such an important thing because we're spending so much time doing it. And it's, clearly the most impactful thing I'm doing because there are some people that I hired that are still there, even though I moved on 4 or 5 years ago, they're still doing, having impact at that company. Yet the level of, it still felt like a very analog, unreliable way that we went about hiring, which is essentially based on having conversations with a bunch of human beings and then those human beings getting together to discuss and try and portray and regurgitate what they learned in order to, triangulate on a decision about the candidate. So it just felt super unreliable. That caused inefficiency and often a bit of, therefore frustration about the hiring process. So that's really the starting point for starting the company. Since then, learned a ton, sort of got super close to a lot of our customers who are recruiters, a few recruiters who we speak to a bunch about sort of their perspective of that problem. And are now very, very focused on really solving that frustration and unreliability by making it so that a lot of the robotic work associated with interviewing people, things like taking notes or rewriting your notes or those sorts of things, take that off the table. We can do that for you, so you can focus more on the human aspects.
Yeah, you just a group of you, or you said you quit your jobs, or how did that?
It wasn't a group. It was 2 of us, so myself and Shara, who's the other co-founder. He had a sort of similar experiences at a different tech company. We used to work together before those 2 companies, respectively. We were sort of, I guess, just actually happened to be talking about frustrations around hiring. And then we sort of threw out this phrase. I can't remember who exactly did it. I think it was a bit of a sort of a mixture, but we threw out this phrase, how would we make it so that no bad hiring decisions are made again? And then when we had that sort of phrase in mind, which is very hard to achieve, no bad hiring decisions, that's going to be very difficult. But when we had that phrase, we started to think, well, really, if you don't know what's happening in the meat of the hiring process, you're never going to achieve that goal. You're never going to make any substantial progress towards it. And so it was really that where we sort of backtracked to, well, we need to try and understand what's happening in interviews. We need to try and help people do better at interviews as a result. And that was the starting point. And there's been a few sort of turns with the product since that starting point, but the fundamental thesis is the same, that these conversations are inflection points in your hiring process, yet there's very little help to do a good job. And you've got a bunch of, you need to multitask during those conversations. So if we can change that.
And did you sort of finance it yourselves, or how did it sort of?
We sort of explored it. We left our jobs and explored the idea and had a few prototypes and sort of just run a bunch of discovery style sort of sessions, like full time, for about six or 9 months, sort of, without, I guess, without money, without being paid. And then when we had a couple of folks who were really keen to use the prototype, or who were actually using the sort of the early version of the product, we got enough conviction that, hey, yeah, this is what we want to dedicate, the next season of our life to. And we raised a pre-seed round and hired a couple of hired a couple of people in sort of at the start of 2019.
And when did that? I mean, AI. There was still talk of AI at that point, of course, but I mean, nothing like it is now. How did it? Can you just talk a little bit about how the product evolved before we dive into what it is now? How did it?
Yeah. So the initial focus of the product was to provide aggregate level insights to recruiting teams about what's happening in their hiring funnel. So the idea would be record and then analyze every interview in the candidate in the pipeline, so that we can tell you, hey, it looks like this particular interview stage is quite inconsistent, or it looks like this particular interviewer, has an especially low candidate talk time, or this one is especially rigorous. There's all these sort of, little insights that we were playing back to folks, and then we enabled you to cut that data by different attributes, like, well, are we interviewing female candidates different to male candidates? And when we end up with candidates who reject an offer, are there things that are sort of structurally different about how we interview that might be causing that outcome? So that was the initial product. So there was still essentially the AI element to the company at the time. We've always sort of been building with AI in mind. Was increasingly we could get more and more sophisticated characteristics out of the conversation based on our own models. So we are essentially recording these conversations, giving you as a customer some value around the quality of your interview process essentially. And while we were doing that, we were building up our own corpus of data around to make us able to identify other characteristics of an interview. What I mean by that is we had a team who would annotate the data. They would sort of highlight where a question was, or highlight where an implied question was. And that would give us the ability to start to understand, well, how do hypothetical questions compare to behavioral questions, and actually build a model that can identify those things automatically. The big thing that's obviously changed in the last year, essentially, since OpenAI since GPT 3.5, is out the need for a company like us to actually build the foundational model ourselves has reduced, because these foundational models from these incredibly well capitalized, incredibly resource heavy companies are so amazing that really what we need to do is fine tune on top of them. So the game has changed slightly.
Can you explain that? I mean, what do you mean by that? Just to
the level of the reasoning power that the foundational models from, let's just focus on OpenAI perhaps, is so much. It's so akin to a sort of a relatively smart human being that you now need to only sort of, it's a really good analogy to think of telling to a human being. You only need to sort of tell it a few examples of what you want it to do, and it can actually scale that across, obviously giving you thousands or millions of answers to a certain data point at once. Whereas before, what we were working towards was more, hey, I'm going to give you 1,000, or actually the number that we had that is actually considered, was 50,000. I'm going to give you 50,000 data points. I'm going to give you 50,000 questions, and I'm going to tell you which of these behavioral and which of these are hypothetical. And then based on that, the AI can deduce from that which of these questions, when I give you the 50,000 and first, is that a behavioral, is that a hypothetical question? And it will give you a good, accurate prediction because it's seen 50,000 other examples and it understands it. Now you don't need anywhere near that number. You can actually almost sort of train or fine tune almost conversationally, based on a back and forth. So it's just the core reasoning power of these foundational models is so far beyond what came before that it changes sort of how how it makes sense for a company like ours to go about building features for our customers.
I mean, did you see that coming, or was it just like when they when they came out there in December? When was it just like?
No, yeah, it was a true step change. So yes, we saw it coming in terms of there was a few actually sort of during 2022 there were a few sort of advancements, and there were a few like research level advancements in the industry that made that it was clear there was a lot of resources going into these large language models, and that's, obviously there's a chance something's going to come of it, but not to the extent that we were like banking on it or thinking, hey, our roadmap is to wait for that to come and then we'll do that. And that was nowhere near that level. It was like it was something that we had to react to.
We're trying the tool and it works really well. So we're really impressed, and we're really, it's really, I mean, already saved us so much time, and we're still just doing a trial, and it's fantastic. So I'm really impressed. But really, just what does it do? What do you actually do today?
So Metaview is an AI note taker built specifically for recruiting. So Metaview records and then transcribes your interviews. Predominantly, it could be your intake meetings or your debrief meeting, any recruiting conversation, but mainly interviews, and then provides you with, expert quality summarized notes of that conversation, and gives you a bunch of tools to sort of restructure those notes exactly how you want them. So what that often means is for a recruiter, maybe they might initially sort of get their set of notes from Metaview that are like 10x better than they could take themselves. So they don't bother taking notes anymore. They just are, engaged and human and curious and persuasive on the call instead of multitasking and taking notes. But then just in a few clicks, they can adapt those notes for their stakeholders. So let's say you're working with a particular hiring manager who actually cares most about these 2 or 3 attributes, and, maybe that's all. You can just in a couple of clicks instruct Metaview to change those notes to a format that the hiring manager wants. So what we're replacing is really 2 very specific, almost behaviors that in the past maybe people wouldn't have thought a ton about, but actually realize are really frustrating when you remove them. One is taking notes during conversations when you really want to be present and engaging with the candidate. And then the other is having to then go back through those usually hastily written notes and try and piece together the narrative for the stakeholder you're working with, which takes up a ton of time, often 20 or 30 minutes after every call. And what we hear again and again is that a lot of the time people would leave that admin to the end of the day, maybe even do it at home in the evening, so they don't have to worry about it the next day. So Metaview doing that for you is the time saver. So that's the sort of, I'd say, that's the immediate value that customers get from Metaview. And when you talk about time saving that you folks are experiencing, it's due to that. There's also another part of it, which obviously this sort of new wave of AI is really good at, which is information recall. So, you may be as an embedded talent agency, or if you're in an in-house team, of course you're having, even as an individual, you might speak to 20 or 30 candidates in a week. And if you times that by your number of recruiters, you're speaking to hundreds of candidates a week. And if you include hiring manager interviews and you're talking to thousands, tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of, conversations per year. And your ability to actually pull out insight from those is really weak, right? Because how do you find the information you need in that sort of vast sea of data you now have? So what you can also do with Metaview is ask Metaview a question. So just like you do ChatGPT, where you might sort of have like some particular query you have in mind or problem you're trying to work through, you can do that with Metaview, with the difference being it knows what happened in your interviews. So you can ask it, hey, who was the candidate who, or sort of, can you plot for me the time where this candidate talked about dealing with conflicts? Find that part of the interview, share it with other people. You don't have to just rely on people's memory of it. Or, you can ask it, over time, you'll be able to ask it across all of the interviews that a candidate had with you. We've got one of the interviewers is flagging that they're not sure about their motivations or right for joining a startup. Can you pull out any times where the candidate mentioned their reasons for wanting to leave? And you can sort of ask these very natural language queries that really you have as a team already. When you think about trying to hire someone, these are sort of the questions you have in your mind, and you just try and, sort of fuzzily work out what do people think about that question and what do we remember the candidate saying. Now, Metaview can just literally extract those particular moments for you, show them to you, so you can be much more informed about your decision.
Can it also give an opinion, or will it be able to give an opinion, whether this particular candidate is a good fit for so-and-so such jobs? Those you think?
Yeah, right now, no, very categorically no. The way that we think about that, and that's just because I think the hiring decisions are too important to sort of do that too experimentally. You'd want to actually experiment with it in a very contained fashion before you do that. So what we really focus on is efficiency. Like, what are things that recruiters or hiring managers are doing anyway, and we can just help them do more quickly, and actually to a higher quality as well, without imposing really any opinion on things. When we think about these judgments of if someone could fit, obviously, there are ways that we think about starting to do that in a way that is still very much unopinionated. What I mean by that is, if you tell our system, maybe through integrating with your ATS or integrating with your your question packs or your rubrics for a candidate, if you tell us that, hey, experience having managed a large team is important in your rubric, and we can identify, hey, it looks like you're about to hire this person, but your rubric said they need to manage a large team, and this person said they've never managed it before. Are you sure you want to do that? That's the type of like objective level information that we can obviously surface to help just make sure your decision is not sort of like missing a key point that you thought was important. So we do think there's really sort of valuable pockets where we can help with recommendations. But in terms of, hey, we think this candidate is good based on, our AI's judgment, no, we don't.
What about sort of next things? I mean, I've actually been using it in interviews, but I also use it in sort of startup meetings. I actually use it in sales meetings as well, just to try it, sort of say, we're using this cool new tool, we want to sort of try it out. And it works quite well for that as well. I think sort of, you sometimes, of course you have to say as a candidate, you understand. But what do you think is the next step for you sort of?
So we recently released models for intake meetings and debrief meetings. So that's like a pretty good clue as to how we think about these things, which is we're very focused on the hiring workflow. So yeah, there's a few people who do use Metaview for other types of conversations, but increasingly Metaview will get better and better at helping you with your recruiting conversations and workflow. And there'll be no sort of substantial improvement in how it helps you with your sales calls, for example. So yeah, that's really where we focus, and where we think about adding to that partially is more conversations that we can sort of bring in to the product to give you a better view. So for example, getting to a world where, when you get to deciding, making a final decision about a candidate, do you have every conversation that was had with that candidate in our platform such that you can help with this? That's like, there's a bunch of functionality that we think will make it make sense for you to roll it out to your hiring managers and your interviewers as well, which is something we care a lot about, because hiring is really a team sport. It's not just, recruiters are only as good as their hiring teams, just as much as hiring teams are only as good as their recruiter. Like, it's a team sport very much. And that's maybe one of the things that's most central to our thesis here, which is, we came at this problem from a hiring manager perspective. Recruiters are a totally, totally vital part of the puzzle, but they are not the only part of the puzzle. And we want to make sure we're including the hiring teams in the product, because they do a really important part of hiring as well. So you'll see more sort of functionality that is more aimed at the collaboration between recruiter and hiring manager, because we think that's such an important relationship. And alongside that, you'll see, so an example of that would be, how can we make it so that the sort of initial calibration that recruiters and hiring managers often go through together, finding a few candidates, speaking to them, trying to play back why this person was or wasn't a good fit so they can look for that in the next person. Again, that's a really vital collaboration, often not done very well, often to the point where the net result is, whatever, just find me some more people, just like, let's just grind it out. Let's just make this an attritional thing. We think we can do a lot better there and actually help people, both sides, get educated. The recruiter can learn a little bit more what the hiring manager wants, or maybe where the hiring manager is being unrealistic, so they can help them understand.
Can you give an example of that, how that could work, or sort of what do you mean by that?
So right now we actually already see it on our platform a bit, but we want to lean into it more. But a very simple example is, rather than a hiring manager sort of just having time in their calendar taken up by an interview, maybe before, for certain candidates where it's not a home run, there's a very seamless way, or very convenient way for our AI to pull out some of the key moments from a recruiter screen, share them with the hiring manager, say, hey, this person we're considering putting through to your round, do you want to just review this section and that section just to make sure you're happy with that? And so just starting to give, maybe just in 2 to 5 minutes, hiring manager a little bit more control over who is it that actually or a little bit more input into who gets into the hiring manager screen round. We see with most of our customers that like 3 out of every 4 candidates are rejected at the hiring manager stage. So there's, if you put a hiring manager empathy hat on, you're sort of you're wasting a lot of time essentially on candidates who don't get through. So we think we can change that. But yeah, that's what we mean. Essentially using our platform, whether it's sort of the recruiter who's sort of highlighting the moments that matter, or our AI that highlights, hey, given what we know about you, HN, we think you might be interested in these sort of segments. So you might want to check them out before having this person scheduled into your calendar.
Can you say something about how this actually works? I mean, you talked about tuning there before. How does it? How do you do it?
Yeah, so an LLM is a large language model. It's essentially the sort of fundamental technology or technique that can create well-reasoned answers to your questions upon command. So when you ask ChatGPT something and it spits out a response, that's doing that based on an understanding of a huge amount of text data in order to give you a text-based answer that is almost imperceptibly different to what a really smart human being might tell you.
And obviously everybody's now heard of OpenAI, but there are lots of them out there. I mean, there's sort of 900 or 1,000 or how many different LLMs are out there?
Yeah, there are, but and obviously many people are starting to build LLMs for on top of some open source models, almost for particular use cases. But there are sort of, I guess, a handful that are almost like the general purpose LLMs. OpenAI has a few, GPT now 4, and like there's a lot of talk about GPT 5 in the next year or so. And then there's another one that we use, which is from a company called Anthropic. The LLM is called Claude. And then there's a few others as well, but those are the two that we use. Meta/Facebook has got one that's getting a bit of traction as well. So you'll see like a lot of the big tech players will provide their own general purpose LLMs over time, but also you'll find is sort of, I wouldn't say niche players, because there'll still be large companies, because it's very resource heavy to train one of these LLMs. So it's preserve of large companies or incredibly well resourced startups. So for example, there's a couple of companies who are building different large language models, LLMs, who, out of the gate raised like $200 million. And that's not sort of $200 million in their bank. What that was agreements with the various providers of resource that they need, that they can use this amount of their, whether it's the chips they had to buy, or whether it's compute they had to buy. Essentially, they had agreements with those folks that they would, in return for equity, give them those resources, because that's what you need to train these models.
No, but very interesting. And yeah. What do you think? I mean, you talked about tuning. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this now. What does that mean, actually? What?
It really is to do with the weighting of the output. So you can obviously, inherently, when you use something like ChatGPT, often what you'll find, of course, is you ask a question, it's not actually quite the answer you want. It's not exactly, you didn't answer it in the way that you wanted. So you ask it to preserve, given that answer you've just given me, now can you do it, but make it simpler and also focus on this aspect, please. And so you are inherently, you're having like a very inefficient way of tuning the output, which is you're sort of like stringing together your prompts. And, obviously that's not scalable for a company like us. That's not the way that we want people to use our product. So what we do is, based on insights that we've gathered over time from historic usage of our product, we expose the LLM to a bunch of data in order to help it understand how it needs to be weighting what it creates for our customers. So it's essentially a mix of, usually the way you start with these things is what you call prompt engineering, which is where you sort of very systematically string together a bunch of prompts in order to get an output that you're very happy with, but then increasingly give the LLM access to some proprietary data that you have in order to better tune its response. But of course, that is not then used, that is not accessible to other customers. So to for example, people who aren't Metaview.
I mean, does that mean that we could sort of create an ants ChatGPT? I mean, how much data do you need to tune something, or, how much is worth doing?
And honestly, I think almost the bar for, because the native capabilities of just engaging with a GPT is getting higher and higher. There are some things that maybe previously were sort of the preserve, actually being able to technically fine tune a model, that now aren't. So, for example, in a couple of weeks ago, we're recording this on the Wednesday, 22nd of November, I think maybe about 10 days ago now, OpenAI had its dev day, and they launched these they launched GPTs, i.e. you can come and build your own GPT just by sort of talking to their GPT composer. And one of the sort of the big things that was different about that is the fact that you can essentially tell a GPT, look at this set of data that I'm going to give you. And that could be public data, or that could be stuff that you actually upload that is, yours and not accessible on the internet, and use that to sort of like weight your responses to this. So like if I was going to give like a really silly example, obviously if I go and just speak to GPT now and say, hey, can you give me some advice on how to grow my startup? It would obviously just look at everything it knows and give me some generic advice. However, if I, let's say you, Carl, went and built a GPT, which was, Elon Musk GPT, and you told that GPT, here's everything Elon Musk has ever said about entrepreneurship. Please use this to inspire your advice whenever someone asks you for startup advice. I would get a different answer. So like a very like basic example, but that's essentially, fine-tuning is essentially just increasingly complex variations of that using obviously predominantly proprietary data, or at least proprietary weightings of that data. Like we have some insight that means we know that this actual corpus of data is more useful to weight the answers for our customer. So therefore, we want our GPT to do that, to take that into account.
Now with the Copilot that's coming, the Microsoft, well, I think it's already there, but we haven't tried it yet because you have to have 300 accounts or something at the moment. But do you think, is it to the point where you think you'll be able to say, read all our emails, this is how we typically reach out to candidates, and I'd like to do it in the way that works best? Is that something that will work, or what do you think you look forward?
Yeah, if that is something that you would like instituted, and imagine if you could say to a member of your team, hey, I'd like us to sort of review every single email that we've sent to candidates and come up with our best practice for how we reach out to candidates, please. How would that human being go about doing that? They would do what you described. Review every email. It would take them hours, days and days and days and days and days. They would be sort of massively struggling to sort of create the pattern recognize between this, because there's just so much data. How do I recognize the patterns? But that's obviously the type of thing that an LLM can do in like a click of fingers. So that's a great example of the type of thing that is like, I don't think we even have to get there, right? That's just that's possible right now. So yeah, totally that sort of thing. Then you get onto like the philosophical, slightly philosophical area of this, which is, okay, well, does that mean we can just use AI to reach out to candidates? And I would say you should definitely be using it partially. But I would say that's like in terms of totally no. And the reason being is that business is about comparative advantage. You want to be better than other people who are trying to compete for this candidate's attention. And if everyone is doing that technique, you won't be better, you'll be exactly the same. So what you're constantly going to come back to is that the human is the alpha. So given we've discovered these patterns, we've used AI to discover these patterns across what works best in our reach out. Given I now don't have to think about sort of putting together, spending 5 minutes putting together that initial, like that first reach out, what are you going to repurpose that 5 minutes for? Is it for sort of like finessing the first lines that are just deeply personal to that person? And then over time, of course, you're hydrating the AI with more insight. Maybe they can start to do that bit as well. And you'll say, well, what's the next thing I can use that for? Now I don't need that 5 minutes anymore. What's the next thing I can use 5 minutes for to, again, create alpha? Because that will still be the difference between whether it's Metaview winning in the market or Ants winning or whatever, all of your clients. And, when they're trying to win candidates, the difference is going to be everyone's going to have access to these tools. They're like almost democratized from the start. Maybe not in the case of this Microsoft Copilot. Sounds like that's only for the larger companies for now. But essentially,
you're right.
Be democratized over time.
Yeah.
The alpha is going to be obviously how you use it, but also what do you do on top of it, essentially.
So it's really interesting, and I agree with that. But if you look around yourself, and you look at sort of the best recruiters now, what do you think? With that in mind, what should they be doing or practicing at the moment to sort of keep up or stay at the front edge of the business?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to go for recruiters. This is like I'll put my opinion out there as strongly as possible, even though I think there's probably room for grayness in this. In reality, there's two ways to go. The way I sort of envision things is you get certain companies now where you have recruiting operations and you have recruiters and you have recruiting coordinators and you have sources and you have like quite a high level of specialization. But in most cases, or in a lot of cases, you still have these sort of full stack recruiters, and someone might have a project to look at the operational like elements of the tools they're using, like a bit randomly and add it to your workload on top of making sure you hit these headcount. That's the way most recruiting gets done. And so when I think about how people spend their time in recruiting, you've got sort of this small amount of time in planning. Like we wish we could do more planning. Like how do we become a world-class team? You have a small amount of time in performing, like actually speaking to candidates, speaking to hiring managers. And then you have a lot of time on what I consider drudgery or admin, like the work about going from planning to performing, all of the work I need to do in between those two things. The way I see it going is a lot of that admin is going to go away. So admin would be things like, maybe admin is the wrong, I think toil or drudgery is a more appropriate word, but things like really sort of cookie cutter style screening. You won't do that anymore. There'll be no point. Really just scouring the internet for profiles, like for hours and hours. Again, there'll be ways that is going to massively reduce the amount of time you spend on that, and or you'll just get sort of some profiles in front of you and sort of like some messaging suggested for you already. Scheduling or scheduling and finding interviewers who are available, all these sort of things, that sort of stuff will go away. And so where you'll go towards is a world where actually have that specialization will become standard, where you'll have recruiters whose primary value that they're going to bring to the table is, I would just broadly bucket this under relationships, which is quality of relationship with candidates, quality of relationships with hiring manager, thoroughness of understanding of the candidate, thoroughness of understanding of the hiring manager and what they're looking for and how that matches up against business goals, and like that sort of full sort of human aspect of brokering a match between company, hiring manager, and candidate. I think there are people who spend tons of, almost like Back to the Future. Like that's the way it maybe was in sort of, Black Book days. I think there'll be more of that because that's the alpha that I'm talking about. That is like where you are truly differentiating yourself from the other company using a different recruiter. So I think there'll be sort of increased specialization there. And I think that'll be culture shock maybe is the wrong term, but sort of, I think we're all so convinced that we're going to this almost less humanistic world. I think that would be a great example of that not being the case. No, that's still actually, when it comes to, making life level decisions about, what company to join, for example, it's just going to be such an important part of it. And then I think on the other side, you'll have people who increasingly sort of do just focus on the planning, maybe the operational aspects of recruiting, because that's more their zone of genius. So I would take this I think it's a very dynamic space. So I wouldn't want anyone to sort of place too much stock, in my opinion, on this. But my guess is that's where we're going. Specialization towards the sort of the relationships and amateur psychology sort of aspects of recruiting. And then on the other side, folks are moving more into the planning, the tools, the process, extracting data from the hiring process in order to improve the next sort of process we run. That sort of stuff will become its own specialization as well.
We're definitely at the point where we see massive improvements already. I mean, and you guys are really good. I mean, one of the first examples that you sort of realize, oh, wow, we're saving lots of time here. Okay, how are we going to monetize this? Are we just going to charge less, or are we going to have a different price model, or, how do you do it? And then I haven't really got an answer yet, but, we're thinking a lot about it and trying it. And at the moment, we're sort of in the move, let's just try everything and then sort of categorize where we have, of course, know our process and know where we spend a lot of time with sourcing. I mean, that's sort of the main. I mean, in Sweden at the moment, on our sort of last 600 hires, we spend about a little bit more than 100 hours of sourcing for each hire. So, I mean, that's where the big time is. And then interviews, we do like 5.7 first interviews per hire. And then that goes on to sort of 2.7 hiring manager, case interviews. So for us, the massive time is the sort of outreach and sourcing and finding them.
I think that's obviously it's accurate what you said because it's your data. I do think that the only answer isn't work out how to find those same candidates quicker, so that it's not, okay, step one, can we make it so that we spend 50 hours to find those candidates in which one of them is the one we hire? Yes. Okay. That's great. That is huge. And one should do that. But there might also be a world where is there an equivalent step one, which is hydrate the intelligence we have while sorting, such that we actually sort of find, 50% as many people, but actually there is the hire within that recruiter. And that's another way to double your sourcing efficiency. So yeah, I don't think necessarily the answer to sourcing efficiency is to work out a way to source more quickly. It might also be, leverage data you have from the rest of the people in the company, or the other interviews you've done, or the intake meeting you've had, to actually inform that sourcing in a more educated way. And then again, this is why this calibration piece that we're starting to think about is so important. If you can sort of, based on those first few interactions with candidates, make it so that the next candidate the sourcer reaches out to is 50% more likely to be a fit, that's, I think, where you get the step change improvements in some of those numbers. But I think it's not an either or, both will happen, and both are good.
What about from your point? I mean, I realize you probably also, since you spend a lot of time thinking about where this market is going, and also perhaps use a lot of tools yourselves, apart from, of course, Metaview, are there other tools that you sort of see a really front edge that of course also could improve other parts of the recruitment process? Not necessarily something that compete with you guys, but something that will help sort of.
I'm seeing some cool model. I'm not going to sort of, let me just say one thing, just so people don't think I'm being like too conceited or something about this. One of the things that one of the step changes that AI is affording for us is the removing the requirement to have your data incredibly structured. So if you think about how you would go about finding insights pre these large language models, you would have data that would in some way be input into a table so that you could query that data. Now, what that might look like to the majority of recruiters is I will fill in specific fields in an applicant tracking system or in a CRM such that someone at some later point can query that data, maybe through sort of just like a generic report within the CRM. But under the hood, there's like some querying of that data going on. The big thing that's changed now is you no longer need to have structured data. So because these LLMs are so powerful, they can find information for you within a sea of unstructured data. So that is why we believe conversations are almost the new frontier for recruiting in terms of as a data source, because gone is the requirement for you to try and pull out specific pieces of information and put it into a specific table, i.e. your ATS. You can just have the thousands and thousands of hours of conversations, and then you can ask AI to find you, based on your question, the question you have, find you the information and find you the insight. And so I do think actually that conversations are especially interesting, or especially, I think they're the predominant new frontier for what we'll be mining and what we'll be sort of changing our workflows around, because suddenly they are variable and sort of not so opaque. So I do think Metaview is a big part of it. Anyway, that's just so it doesn't sound like I think, hey, no, just so you understand why we actually don't think there's going to be that much of a change in other parts of how we do things. It's because I think conversations are actually especially interesting. One area that I have seen some interesting things happen, which I think is more like almost a business model innovation, is actually around sourcing. So I've seen a couple of tools where you give the tool a bunch of information about the type of candidates you're looking for, and you only pay the tool. You only use up your credits if you decide that you want to speak to the candidate they put in front of you. So it's changing the model from me going and speaking to a source as the hiring manager, this is what I'm looking for, go away for 2 days, 2 weeks, or whatever, and come back with a list, and then I'll let you know who I want to speak to tell this AI what you're looking for. They will, in a matter of minutes, show you some profiles. You will essentially yes or no whether they're right, and essentially you're massively reducing that sort of feedback loop. And the reason I think that's quite interesting is because the business model is the right business model. If it forces AI essentially to sort of get the reward of getting a credit used up. It forces it to sort of the objective function is really clear. How do I find people that this person wants? And often, if they brute force it, who cares? Because as the customer of it, I'm only paying when they actually put something in front of me that I'm interested in. So I think that's like an interesting model to you, like that tells me that there's probably a there in terms of using AI to sort of actually do the sort of the real hard graft, the stuff that takes a ton of time on the sourcing side of things. I think that's an interesting idea, and but that's probably the only thing that I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely the way it's going to be in future.
Do you have an example? Can you name drop any of them?
So the one that I saw, it was a tool called Hireflow.
Hireflow, yeah, we've seen that, yeah.
But I don't know if it's unique to them or not. But I thought it was a cool one.
No, there's definitely some examples out there who sort of, and it's difficult to know whether there are definitely some tools that sort of doing sort of, I mean, they have like outreach models where they sort of say, we're going to either pay per candidate or sort of pay per, I mean, of course, per hire, but then you sort of, it's not easy, it's quite clear where the business model is going to go there, actually.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think the outreach stuff for sure is also like, helping you save the time it takes to personalize your outreach while still being personal. For sure, that's a thing too. I just think that's more of like a sustaining innovation. People were already trying to help you with your outreach, and now it's going to be better. It's not like a totally.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, that's why I sort of asked you. I'm thinking, of course, of course, recruitment is big, but sales is a lot bigger, of course. So I'm thinking that the tools that have been used in sales and marketing are probably sort of, I mean, we've all been given these emails over the last few years, and they're sort of more and more personal. And sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're just crazy bad. And and then there's all these tools now. How do you reach out on LinkedIn to do sales? And I was wondering if you've seen anything there that you sort of saying that perhaps you guys are using that that worked, or that you've sort of said, okay, this is going to change that.
No, not on the outreach side. And I need to check in with other members of the team who've been doing more sourcing than me, if there is anything. But I don't believe we've found anything that is. It's not our sort of approach to hiring is a little bit more network based and spearfishy right now.
Yeah.
So
but I was thinking on the sales side maybe, because I assume you guys are looking for people like us. It's sort of.
Oh no, we're pretty. We have an inbound growth motion. People hear about us, they come to our website, they sign up for a free trial. It's we do very little. We're not a very sales driven company at all. We're very product driven.
So can you say something about the challenges you guys are having? What do you think is the sort of toughest challenge going forward for you guys? What are you sort of?
So yeah, challenges and opportunities are in many ways synonymous. So I would say right now, Metaview is exceptionally good for single player use. I know there's a bunch of folks at Ants that are using Metaview, but there's not like a ton of benefit between each of them using it. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no internal.
Yeah, I thought about that.
Just because Carl is using it doesn't mean Sally's product is better. We just rely on everyone independently thinking it's useful, which we're doing a pretty good job of, and people do tend to think it's pretty useful. What we think is the challenge here, or the opportunity, obviously if we succeed in this challenge, is how do we make it so that actually there's almost like an internal network effect here, where if Carl's on it, Carl really wants Sally to be on it too, because it makes their product better in some way. So a really obvious example there might be, hey, if I could get my hiring manager on this as well, then I could see what's going on in their interviews, which makes me better able to screen and make sure they, speak to more of the right candidates, or I prepare my candidates for it, or something like this. There are a bunch of these very tactical motivations and relationships that we think we can tap into that we basically haven't done yet. So I guess the challenge is crack that, because again, central to the way we look at hiring is that it's a team sport. But right now, Metaview is not a team; it's not a multiplayer tool, and we want to change that. And so so that's one sort of like that's I guess maybe let's say the commercial challenge. Obviously, it's in our interest to get more people using the product because it's just good for our business. When I think about it from a why is this going to be really hard to do like significantly well, is a lot of essentially when you talk about multiplayer, part of what you mean is some form of collaboration. Like, hey, because we're both on this together, we are 1 + 1 = 3. A lot of the collaboration on hiring doesn't currently happen anywhere in particular. It might be me saying, hey, Carl, can you jump on a quick Zoom? I want to talk to you about this person. Or me messaging on Slack with some thoughts about the candidate I just spoke to. Some of the data makes its way into the ATS, but actually most of it doesn't. Most of it stays in the place where I sort of have this synchronous interaction with you. And so the big challenge is, can we get access to that context so we can help our users? Or can we even become the home for those type of collaborations? Because we're the home of where the candidate is, it makes sense for you to have that collaboration there too. So that's the thing we want to crack, basically, is give a lot of these collaborations a home. We sort of think about it as almost similar to how a designer might think about Figma. It's like the designer wants the engineers and the product manager and all the other people to be in Figma because it helps them do a better job of designing. And also the engineers and the product managers want to be in Figma too, because it helps them influence the design and, with the higher resolution than just participating in a design review once every 2 weeks. Same thing I think can apply in recruiting. And that's the sort of the platform that we want to build. And yeah, it's not totally clear how we achieve that. We obviously think we have some pretty good ideas, but I imagine it's going to be pretty challenging.
But just, can you want to say something? This is a pod that focuses on, of course, building a tech department. How are you organizing your tech? Is it in the UK or somewhere else, or how are you scaling that?
We're remote first, so we have about half of our team in the UK and then half the team in mainland Europe, the engineering product design team.
As in different places, or
yeah. So we have one hub. We have a hub. I'm in the office today. We have a sort of a hub in central London. And then the folks who are remote, we give them obviously like a WeWork style allowance to use a working location, but essentially they're remote. We do think synchronous collaboration is important. So we're not an async culture. We have a strong asynchronous muscle in terms of documentation and things like this, but fundamentally we rely on synchronous communication. So time zone is important. We want people within certain time zones. We're starting to think about having a footprint beyond just Europe, essentially, and obviously that will start to challenge. Well, how do we work? What's a different way of working, and how do we segment responsibilities given that? But we aren't actually chewing that challenge yet, so we don't have like super developed tools there. But basically, UK and mainland Europe.
And I just wanted to quickly delve in. Of course, one of the other areas that we see massive change is also, of course, in the that might also affect our businesses is the effect on software development. I mean, at least my theory at the moment is that some scene developers you see already kind of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times improvement in efficiency, whereas perhaps the junior ones not quite as much, but still a lot. I mean, you can still sort of see 50 to 100% improvement, which is massive. So I saw the first time in my career that I possibly can sort of see a kind of perhaps a sort of a flattening out of that sort of inevitable need of unbelievable amounts of software developers in the world. Is that something you see, or have you thought about that?
I thought about it a lot. I think this is definitely the territory of topic where, I wouldn't bet on the direction, but my take is actually increased demand for software engineers because, I guess to put it really simply, because you get more ROI out of them. Just like any resource, if previously a software engineer, you were paying them, 100,000 euros and they were worth 500,000 euros to you based on their output. Now they're more valuable to you. And so you're either going to pay them more, or you're going to get more of them. I think every company across the planet who builds technology has more things they'd like to do than they're currently doing. And so the sort of your ability to get through that roadmap quicker, you'll just start to sort of try and do more of your roadmap more quickly. Now, I don't think that will be the case for everyone. I think some companies will obviously take the approach of, okay, cool, well, they're much more efficient now. We only want to build this amount of stuff, so we can afford to sort of like just hire fewer people. Of course, some companies will take that approach. Obviously, the risk that they have is that they don't win their market because the one who's deciding to do all of the build everything wins instead. So no, I actually think demand for a lot of these skills will actually increase quite a lot. Also because you might get organizations, and this is like the long tail of cases, I guess. So in each individual case, it's quite small, but it will add up. You might get cases where people are thinking right now, maybe with my sort of like fairly, like let's look at someone like me, like rudimentary SQL, or maybe slightly better than rudimentary, but like decent SQL skills. So like in terms of like interrogating data. But my ability to keep up with what someone of my technical proficiency can and should be able to do in terms of pulling out insight is like waning and waning. Whereas somebody who's actually focused on that, like I would say like I'm half as good as, like, I used to say maybe I'm half as good as a professional data analyst. So like, should I hire a professional data analyst? No, because I'm like, the actual delta is not large enough given the amount of work that I need to do here. But I just think that delta is going to get larger and larger because the suite of tools and the sort of the learnings that you have around how to get the best out of the technology will just grow and grow, whereas mine is very static because I'm focused on so many other things. So I just think the actual, the sort of the value of me hiring that person, because in this case, the sort of the insight and data that they can extract and provide to our business is just actually getting, the delta between them and me is getting larger and larger, so I'm more likely to hire them. So that's the way that I think. I think that applies to recruiters as well, by the way, where, especially in this world where recruiters are getting, I believe recruiters will be more and more the sort of the guardian of the the relationships and the brokering of these relationships, I think again you'll more likely think that, hey, we should get a professional to do this thing because they're so much more proficient at this very particular thing. It's worth it.
That's interesting. Just sort of to finish off there before I have lots of more questions, but just what about what's your sort of general? I assume you have this. I mean, this sort of wider AI view. Where's the world? Where's this going to take the world? Do you have a? I mean, you sort of on the positive side.
Oh,
what,
yeah.
what do you think is what's sort of going to happen?
Show me someone's incentive, and I'll show you their opinion. Type. Obviously, I am very much an AI optimist. It's very hard for me to disconnect that from obviously my professional life. So I don't know how much that sort of that point of view is really worth, but. I also think that the more sort of societal questions, there's enough people in the world who are thinking, like, this maybe sounds a little bit like not taking responsibility for things, but there's a lot of people in the world, frankly, far more powerful than you and I, who are thinking about the societal implications of this thing. The way that we, I think, should think about it is we work in, whether you want to think about it in terms of like we work in capitalist economies, or whether you want to think about it in terms of our job is to help our customers, and that's what we are. That's why we're their partners. That is the lens that I think about it through. And there is no technology available that can make as big of a difference for the customers in the way that we want to help them as these new capabilities. And that is why they get so much of my and our attention. And you can sort of rail against that, and you will probably unfortunately be a sort of a footnote, or like you'll be some collateral damage along the way where you'll get sort of, things will move on without you. And so it just feels like a losing position really to sort of take any other. From my, if I was the sort of the, a world leader, maybe I'd have to have more of a sort of a considered thought if I could actually influence the progress or delay of this. I would still say even in that position, my overall view would be, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, this progress is happening, and what it's about is taking an active role in making sure it's happening and doing the things that we want it to do. And you don't do that from the sidelines. You do that by honing your intuition, using these tools, being the sort of the force that you want to see.
Just a quick, I mean, just because everybody's talking about it now, have you, and the recent sort of Sam Altman, have you sort of followed that? I'm assuming you're reading the same news that we are, but
very much.
Have you any sort of any insights that you, what's your view on this? Seeing as this is probably going to be old news once this is out, but still, it's just interesting to hear you.
So we had like a slight, unfortunately, we had like obviously we were mainly thinking about it from a business continuity perspective. Like, obviously we have a partnership with OpenAI. We have a partnership with other large language model providers as well. So we're not like existentially reliant on them, but like they've so far been a great partner and have enabled us to do some pretty cool things earlier than other people in the market a lot of the time, given sort of, because we actually were working with them for a while on some smaller parts of our products before sort of they become such a key part of our product. So I was watching it like with a lot of curiosity, almost from like a gossipy, like just salacious, hey, what the hell's happening? Succession style sort of like interest. And then also with the sort of a slight thought for, hang on, if they have a really misaligned board and we're really, frankly, they're currently powering key parts of our products, like, is that a concern? But those are the only two ways. But I don't nowhere near enough to the point where we're truly concerned that, hey, this is like, a big problem for us. But it's a good reminder. Obviously, these are just companies full of human beings who have their own motivations, and
It was strange, wasn't it? Because I thought, how come Microsoft didn't know?
Yeah,
the head of the board didn't know. How does that work?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, when there's FOMO is at play, even these massive corporations obviously make these like pretty funny decisions, and it's super interesting as well. Like I guess this is now reflected in real time. I haven't actually thought about this before, but why did this occur? Well, this occurred because, one, like it or loathe it, clearly a sort of a for-profit organization is measured on something. And so you can have pretty good signals that things might not be going well here and this person is at risk, because if they're not obviously creating profit for shareholders, then that's going to be a problem. Whereas in this situation where it's a little bit cloudier what this organization is about, you have these other things at play that are completely unpredictable. Because again, it's just human beings sort of that have like a mandate that they understand their mandate differently from how you do, because it's not a number. And so, yeah, I guess it's an interesting sort of world where obviously what we want in our partners is stability, because we want to obviously be able to rely on these things and know they're going to be around in a year, just as our customers do of us, of course. And so it's interesting how that could affect companies like our psyche around working with. It's the upside. Like, even if imagine if Metaview was a charity. Actually, this tells me I want my suppliers not to be charities as a charity, because I need them to be stable. So it's funny how this like really aligned, even if you don't love the incentive, the profit incentive. The fact that it's one incentive for everyone makes people's behaviors stable and predictable enough that you can actually make bets of your own and try and make change.
But I mean, I thought what it made me think about was also that sort of, you have to perhaps have some options, because the things are changing so quickly and just that happen. I mean, what does that mean? And you sort of realize that if you build your whole business on working with OpenAI, that might be a problem. And it's just, and that's why my thinking of sort of a suite of tools, you sort of realize that there's so much that's happening now over just a few months. It's probably before this is kind of stabilized, you can't sort of put your bets just in one basket, because it's just impossible to know.
Totally. But the only thing I'd say is that's not a new problem, right? You have the same thing
that's true. That's true.
With what cloud infrastructure you're using, and obviously there's lots of ways you can make sure you don't sort of not too dependent on a certain. And like obviously cloud infrastructure increasingly is commoditized. I think these large language models will become commoditized too. There'll be ones that are very similar to this, and you can switch them out like relatively easily. Right now, there's a little bit of, they're not commodities. They are like actually sort of, you'll literally get different output from each of them. But that will cease. That's not their sustaining advantage. Their sustaining advantage is going to be, well, essentially ability to drive down cost so that people like us can use that more and more within our product without having to pass the cost on to our customers. So yeah, I think it's like a temporary problem, could sting like someone every now and then, but actually won't be a problem in the grand scheme of things any more than, being an AWS shop is.
So finally, do you have any sort of tips? I mean, what do you listen to? What do you read? What do you kind of do to keep on top of these things? What's the view?
Not enough. I feel like I should do more, to be honest, but it's just, there's not enough hours in the day. It's just moving so fast. I rely actually quite a bit on some of the team here's synthesis of what this means, what these sort of updates mean for the market. So yeah, my main media diet is Twitter for sure, or X, I should say. That's where I get most of my sort of.
Any particular people you follow there you think you like, or that you sort of inspired by?
No one non-obvious springs to mind, really. Not from like an informative, true like learnings information perspective. Let me dwell on that one for a little bit and see if there's anyone who I really recommend who's not just like Sam Altman or Elon Musk or something, which isn't that interesting. I think I tend to find that I think most of my learning, given this, so again, I really think we're only scratching the surface even of what these current LLMs are capable of. I don't mean from a sort of an actual like technical capability perspective. I mean from the use cases that could be applied to in smart ways that hasn't been sort of, or the other pieces of data it can be fused with in order to create some interesting. I think that's what we're hardly scratching the surface of. So I find like the main way I learn is through like analogous examples. Like, hey, this thing's happening over here. That's actually pretty cool. And actually, there's a case where we could do something similar in our world. Like, for example, this is really, really random and might even be hard to communicate verbally. But I saw I think it's called Diagram GPT. So Diagram GPT, nothing like not mind-blowing necessarily, although I hope they're not listening and then sort of think I'm doing them a disservice. But essentially it was this app where you can explain to it in natural language what technical diagram you want it to draw, or give it some code and say, can you draw the technical diagram that that would be a good representation of how the architecture sort of that this code sort of lives within. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's really examples from other industries that makes me, okay, what's the recruiting like example of that? Is there a world where we could go to a company who doesn't currently have structured interviews, but actually there is some sort of bottoms up structure that's emerging. We could give it all of our interviews and say, okay, cool. Here's your structured interview process. Or could it be, could we give it a bunch of scorecards that people have written and just as a sort of a freely available product, help recruiters pass what is all the information I've received in these scorecards? What are the pros? What are the cons? Across all very simple things, but actually could make a difference to recruiters day to day. So anyway, let's not get caught up on the specifics because I don't think I gave the best examples. My point is, I think the main way I'm learning is by being curious about what other tools exist out there and then thinking, what's the analogy for how something with this sort of similar reasoning capability could help me?
And finally, do you have anybody you want to recommend to the pod? Anybody we think we should have on?
Do you tend to have sort of talent folks predominantly or technology folks?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it'd be really interesting to have somebody. I mean, I've just, sort of a great recruiter you recommend in the British market might be really interesting, or somebody from a different market. I mean, that's really interesting, or somebody sort of, sharing, what's different. And those sort of things are really quite often very appreciated. I mean, we can really nerd in the pod and go to sort of really
I would say
that's the most.
I've actually had a bunch of really good sort of like broadcasted communications with recruiters recently. So I don't want to sort of pick favorites, but one person who I think is has really she's really sort of putting a lot of high quality thinking out there, specifically around recruiting, is Jen Kim. So yeah, you should check her out. I think her Twitter handle is Jen is typing. And
is that Jen with a G or a J?
With a J, short for Jennifer. So yeah, can definitely connect you with her. I think she's got. I'm personally, I watch out for her whenever she's sort of appearing or sort of talking on other things. So I think she'd be really good for you to go deep with.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. I think we're done. Anything else? Anything you would like to have said, or you've forgotten, or that you'd like to clarify, or that sort of feels important?
Nothing's jumping out. I mean, it was an awesome conversation. Appreciate your questions, and obviously, keen for folks to check out Metaview and tell me what they think about that. But I think we spoke a bunch about that already. So and maybe one other small thing for the recruiter sort of population. Obviously, you asked about information sources that I rely on. We have a newsletter, the Recruiters AI Digest. It's not a Metaview focused thing. It's just exactly what it sounds like. It's the idea is we synthesize the main developments within AI over the last week, and what that means for recruiting. And it's a good resource for a lot of folks. We get pretty good feedback on that. So I'd probably recommend people check that out too.
Siadhal, thank you very much for joining the podd. Nästa vecka så är det oerhört spännande. Jag har vara med i en annan podd. Emil Stighäll som gillar jättemycket på Ants och i podden som har en podd som heter Attrahera Rekrytera-podden. Typiskt brukar jag inte få för andra poddar. Ja, det gör inte sant. Det gör vi varje gång. Vi är allt för sharing and caring. Och jag fick på ett roligt sätt vara med i hans podd. Den var jättebra och vi tyckte att det blev bra. Så vi kommer släppa den i vår feed som en liten julaftons avslutning. Och då kommer jag också kanske säga någonting om hela året. Var vi står, var vi är på väg någonstans och kanske i bästa fall någonting om vad framtiden har i sitt sköte för oss. Och det är ju faktiskt så att det här är sista avsnittet före julafton. Så jag hoppas att ni alla får en riktigt, riktigt bra och fridfull jul. Det tror jag man kan behöva efter det här året.